Welcome to BISMA. Today we'll be covering joint actions. Before we do that, it's important that you know what anatomical position is. Anatomical position refers to this exact position like so. Standing upright with the crown of the head reaching up, the shoulders down and back. Arms at your sides with the palms facing forward, legs straight and feet flat on the ground. Extension is the easiest to remember because we're already in extension with most of our joints right now. For example, the spine is already extended. However, if we were going into spine flexion, it would look like this. Now from side view, you can see spine flexion means rounding of the spine. We're decreasing the angle between two joints. If we go back to extension, standing upright, we're increasing the angle between two joints, or straightening the spine. An example of this would be if we were doing a crunch, lying on our backs, then we'd be flexing the spine. Alright, now let's look at some other joints as examples of flexion and extension. Let's look at the hips. If we were to flex and extend the hips, hip flexion would look like this. Bringing the leg in front of the body. We're decreasing the joint angle here. And this would be an exercise like swinging the leg or kicking the leg forward. Now hip extension means we're bringing the leg back. We're increasing the joint angle here. And this would be an exercise like a standing leg kick back, or even a glute kick back. Okay? Now moving down to the knees. The knees can also flex and extend. So knee flexion looks like this. We're decreasing the joint angle here. An example would be like a hamstring curl or a leg curl. Knee flexion, whereas knee extension, we're straightening the leg. Example would be like doing a seated leg extension machine. Alright, another example, let's look at the elbows. If we were to flex the elbows, we would be decreasing the angle between our arms, arm joints, the lower arm, radius and ulna, and the upper arm, the humerus. Elbow flexion. An example would be like doing a bicep curl. And then elbow extension, straightening the arms, increasing that angle once again. Now, if we look at the shoulder is a little bit more complicated to remember. Not quite as simple. Shoulder flexion looks like this, bringing the arm overhead. And shoulder extension would be bringing the arm back behind you. All right, let's move on to the next one. Next, let's cover abduction and adduction. Abduction, bringing the joint out away from midline. Adduction, bringing it in toward midline. Here's an example with the shoulder. Abduction of the shoulder would look like this. We're bringing the arm or the limb out away from midline. Adduction, like we're adding it back in. We're adding size to our body now as we bring the arms back in. So an example of this may be doing like a lateral raise exercise. That would involve abduction of the shoulder. Other joints that do abduction and adduction are the hip. The hip can abduct and adduct. For example, once again starting with midline, if we raise the leg out to the side, we are abducting the leg, bringing it away from midline. And then adduction as we bring it back in toward midline. And an example exercise of this could be doing a leg raise or standing abduction out to the side with a band or a cable machine. Okay? And one more example. The fingers also do abduction and adduction. So think about midline running right through the middle of the hand. Abduction, bringing the fingers apart, away from midline, and adduction, bringing the fingers together again. All right, let's move on to our third lesson, lateral flexion and extension. This mostly refers to the spine. Most everything's extended right now, and that includes the spine. But if we were to bend to the side, like a side bending motion, like this, we're now in lateral flexion. We are bending in a frontal plane. The spine is now flexed to one side. And when we come back up, straight, we're now in extension again. Spine can also do rotation. So let's talk about rotation. Rotation, you would think of maybe turning or twisting, right? So we're beginning in spine extension, but if we turn or twist to one side, we're now rotating the spine. And right there, I'm rotating mostly thoracic and lumbar spine. You can also do the cervical spine rotation, turning to one side. The shoulders also do rotation. They do medial or lateral rotation. Let's begin with lateral rotation. If I bring the palms forward, and so I'm reaching the thumbs back, I'm in lateral rotation, which is also called external rotation. Now, if I bring the thumbs forward toward the body, now that the palms are facing the back of the room, I've now done medial rotation or internal rotation. I'm bringing the arms or the humerus bones, rotating them inward toward my body. Once again, if I rotate the humerus externally away from the body, I'm going into external rotation or lateral rotation. Another joint that does rotational movements is the hip joint. So if I stand with the toes facing forward, anatomic position, but then let's say I turn my toes externally outward. I'm now doing external or lateral rotation of the hip. I'm going to bring it back forward. I'm going to go all the way inward now. Medial or internal rotation of the hip. All right, so the spine, shoulders, and the hips do rotation. Next, let's cover horizontal flexion and extension. We're going to begin with the arms up at shoulder height. If I bring the hands towards each other, arms coming in, reaching forward, I've now done horizontal flexion. I'm bringing the two joints or limbs toward each other and decreasing that angle between them, or space between them. Now, if I bring the arms apart, I'm going into horizontal extension, increasing the space between the limbs, arms are straight, reaching back. Example exercise would be like a chest fly. Chest fly, I'm doing horizontal flexion and horizontal extension to perform that exercise. Next, let's take a closer look at the scapula, or the shoulder girdle. The scapula can move in many different directions. Predominantly, they can do protraction and retraction. Protraction means we're bringing the shoulders or rounding them forward. Retraction means we're bringing the shoulder blades back as if we're squeezing them back and pinching a penny back between the shoulder blades. Here it is from back view. Protraction and retraction. The shoulder blades also do elevation and depression. Elevation looks like this. Elevating or raising the shoulders up. And depression, lowering the shoulders back down. So some example exercises. For elevation and depression, maybe like doing a shrug. And for protraction and retraction, we'll be doing any sort of rowing motion as we reach forward and then row and retract back. All right, we're almost done. We're now going to take a look at the feet. The feet can do 4 major movements. Here they are. plantar flexion and dorsiflexion are the first two. Plantar flexion is basically pointing or planting the balls of the foot down on the ground. Here it is from side view. Plantar flexion is pointing the foot, okay? Planting the foot. Dorsiflexion, lifting the foot up, bringing the toes to your nose. Toes up toward the shins, okay? Plantar flexion, dorsiflexion. So whenever we do any sort of calf raise exercise, we're going from plantar flexion down to dorsiflexion. Okay? And I said the ankles do 4 motions, so the other two besides plantar and dorsiflexion are inversion and eversion. Here's what it looks like. Inversion, we're bringing the toes inward toward midline. Eversion, bringing the toes externally or outward away from midline. So if I were to roll or shift my weight to the outsides of my feet, that is inversion. If I were to roll or shift the weight to the insides of my feet, that's eversion. And finally, we'll cover wrist, supination, and pronation. In anatomical position, we are already in wrist supination. It basically means having the palms up. So this is supination, and the opposite of it is pronation, palms down. Supination is really easy to remember because it's like you're holding a bowl of soup and you don't want to tip it. Pronation is just the opposite, palms down. You can think of like pro football players putting their hands in for a huddle like this. So wrist pronation, wrist supination. All right, well that's it. Thanks for joining me.